Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now Jesus was speaking in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath day. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands upon her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
Please be seated. And let us pray. Good God, we come before you today, on this Sunday, the morning of the resurrection, to remember you and to be refreshed by your word. Lord, may we receive a truly deep peace, that our bodies, our minds, and our souls may be refreshed. So may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen. I distantly recall peering back into the years of my adolescence, the summer after 8th grade, in which I was consumed, for some reason, to develop my athletic abilities to the furthest extent I could. Perhaps inspired by Olympic athletes, as many around the world are this August, something got into my blood that drove me to realize to the furthest extent I could my athletic potentialities, that I might be more successful that coming fall. Accordingly, I began a strict regimen of exercise. 3 days a week, I would join throws practice with shot put, disc, and javelin from 8 until 11. And 11 until noon, we trained with weights in the gym. Oftentimes, I would run the miles from home to practice. Soccer team met for drills 2 to 4 days per week for a couple of hours in the afternoons, and 3 days a week, I would take along with the cross-country team in their long-distance runs. It sounded like a perfect plan for a committed 7th grader, or 8th grader. I recall keeping it for about a week and a half. And one day after throws practice, utterly exhausted, I came to myself and realized that my limit had not only been reached, but had been well surpassed. My body was a lump of jelly, then and for a couple weeks following. I needed to reevaluate my plan. Learning then the timeless lesson, so simply phrased by Clint Eastwood, a man's got to know his limitations. How well put. Though we in the world watch together on television the greatest athletes around the globe push the limitations of the human body in every direction, faster, stronger, more graceful, more collaborative, it nonetheless remains that in each of our lives, we are bordered by limitations. We are finite beings in a limited universe with energy, time, ability, and resources that go only so far in any direction in life. And with these limitations comes a need for our bodies and our minds to rest. to unwind from the taut stresses of their labors, and to lie listless for a while, that they may renew to endeavor vigorous action again in a new day. And as finite beings, we have been blessed by our Maker, who knows us all too well, with an injunction that we do rest. The Lord has given to us and has even set in stone that we should one day of the week set aside a day specially appointed to lay down our tools of the trade and our working garb and our professional ambitions, to pass a time simply of rest. Acknowledge our limited nature and our need for rest. God has given us this time to regather our energies, to repair our bodies, to unwind our minds, and to refresh our souls in a day without obligations on our beings. Now God, again, knowing us, gave this to us as a command. For all too often, this gift is let to slide in our weekly routine, and knowing our tendency to crowd out that which is not mandated, our Lord has given it to us as an order, as to one needing to be told to go home from work, or sent on a vacation by a knowing boss who perceives our presence and our energy levels, even though one would wish to stay and see one last project through. This imperative by God is stated thus in the book of Deuteronomy. I quote at length. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter or your servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and your female servants may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commands you to keep the Sabbath day. This command, this fourth commandment, as all things that come from above from the Father of lights, is a gift. Every seventh day, anointed as a day of rest. We are adjured to put aside work, to close the computer, to refrain from physical exertion, to stow the phone, and to pass the day recuperating from the workaday week. This brief reprieve refreshes the body as much as it renews the mind, which is under strain throughout the week, making decisions and processing information. Yet above a mere rest, the Sabbath is a day in which our souls are fashioned anew, where more than simply going to a spa for the body and more than an extended break for the mind, the Sabbath refills our souls with the light of God. That deep rest, that deep peace that sages struggle to put into words. This is made on the Sabbath by turning our hearts and our souls to God in worship, by giving our minds to wash of His truth through study, encountering Him personally in prayer, that our souls be made truly anew in a way that only God can do for us. And this is perhaps one need that surpasses many others in this day and age. I have before shared that when asking others severally about how they are doing, the most common responses are that people are doing good and that they're busy. We are a busy people, suffering without an ordered rest in our week. In a study I just read, just actually this morning, fully 53% of workers feel overworked or burnt out, even though most are happy in their professions. At one time, I've been told, people would take a day off together. Shops and organizations would close on a day that all people took off It will allow people to go to church, to study the Bible, and enjoy life. Yet businesses today are open 7 days a week and increasingly 24 hours a day. And with connection to our work and to our trade and through our phones wherever we go, it has grown more difficult to maintain this observance as people around us flow past with full schedules. And it is a challenge to preserve in this time. In fact, for myself, it has even become a discipline, which I keep imperfectly. But at my best, I leave at noon on Friday from the office. And I set aside all personal duties, personal as well as professional, until the same time the following day. During that time, I sleep a lot. The other day, I slept for 15 hours, and I could not believe it. I read the scriptures, I commune with God in prayer, I hike in the beautiful outdoors, I visit friends I love, and altogether enjoy this beautiful life that God has given us without the pressing obligations around us. After such time, I find that refreshment difficult to put into words, and I can only recommend it to others heartily to so try. Interestingly, the gospel story today collides with this blessed injunction in an indirect way. As in this moment in the scriptures with Jesus in the synagogue, it seems to transgress the very teachings just so named. One may construe Jesus as dismissing the Sabbath in toto as restrictions that are more harmful than good. For truly abiding by the Sabbath rule would have held this lady in bondage and in suffering. Yet Jesus did not abolish the Sabbath, but instead he abolished the scrupulosity that turns this very blessed day, into just another onerous obligation. Jesus has found himself in the synagogue on the Sabbath, teaching from the scriptures there, as well as taking extended times away to pray in the wilderness. His objection was making this relaxing gift into a strict requirement, the breaking of which became a grievous sin. One more load heaped upon people's shoulders that was hard to bear. And it was intended exactly the other way around. The Sabbath was made for man, as Jesus said, and not man for the Sabbath. This, along with all of the moral commands given through the scriptures and by Jesus, are rich gifts to make our lives blessed. Good works, including honoring the Sabbath, proceed from a renewed and inspired heart. They are not the strict requirements that are requisite for our approval by God. But I've spoken too long, and it is time to get on with our Sabbath rest. With this, I pray that this Sabbath brings you all now, and someday each week, the most sublime and supreme refreshment found only in God. And all God's people say, Amen.